Hello, everyone. Okay, round two. I don't know what happened with my last video. The video just completely dropped, so I'm sorry for that. Today is Monday, the 23rd of September, 2024. I'm a little bit later with my my video today, but again, I've been quite busy. And as I said in my original intro, I tore my meniscus. It might be more than that, but once I see an orthopedic surgeon, whenever I get the call, I'll be further assessed and examined and see if I need surgery or not. Likely not, or see if there's more tears because it is quite swollen and painful. But it is what it is. Anyway, a lot to get through today, like I said before. Well, not before, like 5 minutes ago. There's a lot in the mainstream media right now. There's a lot of inaccurate information being spewed on all sides. And so it's really hard to navigate sometimes, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, I will share some information. And this shouldn't be new to people that are not new to my channel. And so here we go. This is the first one I wanted to show.
I had legal guardianship of Usher when I had legal guardianship of Usher when you know he did his first album. I did Usher's first album.
Diddy made Usher feel accepted.
You may not be able to rap, you may not be able to sing, but there's something else that you can do.
But there's something else you can do. What an unbelievably creepy thing to say, especially when you're working with a lot of underage artists. Usher, of course, being the primary one that we're going to be looking at in this video, because he was only 13 when he started working in this industry, and he started working directly with Diddy. Diddy decided to take legal guardianship over Usher. His father was not in the picture. What we're looking at is Usher deleting all of his tweets and potentially being complicit in some of these things. I have not seen a direct evidence that he is in the Diddy tapes. Perhaps he is in one of the other sections of them. We have not seen that yet. But what we do know is there's a very high probability that Diddy was abused in multiple ways. We know he was abused in some ways by being exposed at a very young age to a lot of graphic things, including women at parties, even men at parties, seeing a lot of that. We know that for a fact. Some of the stuff with drinking and other things regarding that, including far worse stuff, that's confirmed. What isn't confirmed is whether or not Diddy and Usher had some sort of relationship together. As we know, Diddy has had multiple male partners. Disturbing stuff to think about, considering the age and also considering the fact that in Hollywood, this happens regularly. If you take a look at what just happened with Drake Bell, I talked to Drake about what happened to him. He had someone in the industry who was part of Nickelodeon that was taking advantage of him on a consistent basis, and he felt like he had to do it in order to keep his role and paying for his family. That was the sacrifice he felt like he had to make. And think about someone like Drake, who has his father, who has his mother, and still pressured to do that. Still, they're able to get away with it. Imagine someone who doesn't have a father to stand up for them. Imagine someone whose mother is perhaps not very intelligent. If you're allowing your son to have legal guardianship and given to such a creepy individual who's so bad when it comes to a lot of his actions, and you have to be a pretty dumb person. And unfortunately, that's the case with Usher's mom. He was portrayed over and over and over again as a child by so many people who you're supposed to be able to trust. It's a tragic story, but that doesn't excuse then growing up and doing a lot of the same things, allegedly, that you had to be a victim of as a kid. Both are evil. And because of that, there's a high probability that we're going to see Usher involved in some legal battles soon. That's why he had to delete all of his tweets. Obviously, that's something you do when there's legal counsel telling you to do that. It means you're scared. It means there are legal probes happening. It means you're going to be investigated, or you're already being investigated. That's what it typically means, allegedly, of course. I'm Matt Wallace. Make sure to follow here on Rumble with notifications on. Stay updated in real time, and I'll see you.
Yeah, so that was just some footage of Diddy and Usher and Bieber. Again, this all needs to be like further investigated, but there's just a lot of information that's getting out there. A lot of videos being leaked. This one.
I have been looking over the footage from this party so many times, every angle I can find, scouring the internet, messaging people who were there, who might want to help to expose the truth. And I believe I may have finally discovered a piece of footage. This is super zoomed in, by the way, and enhanced slightly. that may show Michelle Obama in disguise. There they have high quality makeup artists that can make them look like almost anyone, but you can still typically see some of the facial features and some of the other features going through. Height is one important one. The height matches the fact that there's headphones there to cover up the Adam's apple. A lot of stuff matches as you compare it to this clip of Michelle Obama, an older clip around the same time. You can see the similarities there. Here's one showing all of the muscles, and then there's one, it's okay, bro, I got you. That right there, maybe slipping up a little bit on the campaign trail and showing who he really is. Michelle Obama is not a woman. Michelle Obama is, in fact, a trans individual. As we continue to look at the footage, it becomes insanely obvious. Even the way that he walks. But what gets even crazier is when you listen to his voice.
I was a hospital executive.
That is Michelle Obama before he perfected the more feminine sounding voice. You can still kind of tell, but you can clearly see the difference in the voice.
I was a hospital executive.
It is a practiced voice, not a real voice. A lot of surgeries, a lot of training went in to the public perception that Michelle Obama is a woman. Of course, this is all part of their power grab. He's not going to be president as Obama if he is a trans gay man, or if he's with a trans gay man. As you can see here, some footage of Manchell walking, and you see the clear bulge as he's walking along. Again, this also before one of the reduction surgeries. So many surgeries, it's hard to even count. At this point, you can clearly see all of them. But finally, I believe we have the proof we need to say that Michelle Obama is not only a man, but also is involved way more heavily in some of this Diddy stuff than a lot of people even realize. And that right there is something that needs to be looked into further. And potentially we could
look into further. Still not convincing enough, right? Like he's not bringing any proof, but yeah. So he could have done a lot better on that.
Part of his bail hearing. Eminently trustworthy. Well, we'll see about that. But there are a lot of questions still in this indictment. Are there bigger fish to fry here? There's a lot of holes, a lot of unanswered questions. Someone who's been digging into this very deeply for many, many months is Ian Carroll. Of course, you can follow him on X, on TikTok, and he's been doing an amazing job and amazing journalism digging into this, to all of this and how deeply this goes. So we invited Ian to come on the show and dive a little bit more deeply into all of this. Ian, great to see you today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Clayton. Great to be back, man.
So I just want to go through pieces of this indictment because Natalie did a great job yesterday deep diving, going through all the pieces of the indictment. But there's a lot. I mean, the indictment describes a pattern of abuse and coercion in all of this, but the full extent of this criminal organization and these alleged activities, we don't know. Who else might be involved in this is still not fully clear. So that's my side of it. What did you make of what's left out of this indictment?
I mean, the glaring hole is that the indictment goes after sort of the bottom of what we learned from the Lil Rod lawsuit. It goes after the guns and the drugs and a lot of the violence on Diddy's level. But notably missing is the name Lucian Grange, the CEO of Universal Music Group. He was named originally in Lil Rod's lawsuit with alleged clear evidence of him knowing about the parties and funding the parties. But later on, through mechanisms of power, he got his name removed from that lawsuit, is my understanding, and now he does not show up in the indictment against Diddy. And that's kind of to be expected because often they'll go after the smaller fish first. But that's the biggest hole in the story because that starts to cut the legs off of going upwards above it.
So in that way, then, do you think I said this yesterday on the show that I feel like he might be the scapegoat here and that the goal is to try to keep it, stop it with him. Nothing more to see here. Don't go any higher. Don't look at how dirty and deeply this goes. Is that your sense of it?
That's the worry. And I think that right now there's prevailing sentiments on the internet, and the pessimistic sentiment is they're going to cover up all of the connections and not go after the bigger fish and use Diddy as a scapegoat. And that seems likely based on past history, but there is a large optimistic sentiment that they are going after him now and they have arrested him and he may be talking. They denied him bail, allegedly. And so there are people that believe that they're going to get him to talk and to start to add other indictments, add other charges, and start to arrest other people. Time will tell. I'm sure hoping that they go after more and that this is just the start. But it's really hard to say at this point if we have a new justice system or any actual justice in this case, or whether it's just another Epstein 2.0.
Yesterday on the show, we talked about Fahim Muhammad and this very odd purchasing of property at the southern border, right along the southern border wall, right next to Tijuana in the town of Boulevard. Which, as we talked about on the show yesterday, no one would buy property at that location unless you're a criminal or you want to be involved in some sort of cartel-related organization to traffic people across the southern border. That piece of it seems glaringly missing right now. What do you make of that?
First of all, anyone who hasn't seen your episode about that from the other day should go watch it. I had speculated a little bit about Fahim Muhammad and that property side of it when I first started investigating, but I didn't find that news clip that you guys found. And that really puts it into clear, obvious, like in your face perspective. Because Fahim Muhammad, if anyone doesn't know, Fahim Muhammad was Michael Jackson's head of security when this guy was like in his early 20s, straight out of college, which is already a huge red flag. And as soon as Michael Jackson died, he gets promoted to being the head of Diddy's security for this blackmail ring, which means he's overseeing all this activity. So clearly his background is not business and real estate degrees that he got in college. And him having this other side of his business, which is this property purchasing, he's like gifting acres and acres of property to his 14-year-old son, which just sounds like tax write-offs and money laundering to me. It's on the southern border with the southern border wall there. It's a big enough piece of property that it could easily be used for human trafficking. And I've spoken with other journalists on the ground in the San Diego area that are reaching the exact same conclusions and even going a little deeper. So I'm still tracing those threads. But to me, that speaks to connections to much bigger things in the industry and to a much bigger network, because not only is the real estate, the human trafficking, the minors, all of that's missing from the current indictments, but also any mention of the hidden cameras and the alleged video blackmail operation. That is also missing from the indictments. And those are the two aspects that tie this most directly to an Epstein-style organization. And we all don't live in the blackmail world. We don't live in the black market. So we don't really think of how that industry works. But just like if you worked in the sports industry or you worked in the movie business, you know the other people that work in your industry. You know the other big players. And so often I would assume these big players in the blackmail industry and in the human trafficking industry, they probably know each other, just like arms traffickers know each other, just like drug traffickers know each other. And so Fahim Muhammad is one of the obvious glaring examples of potential ties to the other aspects of the black market that is missing at this point.
It is glaring, right, that this big piece of it is missing, the child trafficking minors piece of this. And they did open it up during the press conference to, hey, we've got a tip line. Any victims out there, we want you to come forward. Do you get the sense that we haven't closed the book on that particular part of the story, that might be the other shoe to drop here, the sex trafficking and the minors? I can only hope, because that, to me, time and time again, we talk about on our show, I don't know what it is about the lack of attention on child trafficking in the United States, but it seems to get just brushed aside, and they're going after him for guns and other things.
Yeah. I mean, they're on the more like rational or skeptical side of things. It is important to note that when you're talking about child trafficking, you're talking about underage victims. It can be notoriously hard to actually get hard evidence that you can prosecute in a court of law, partially because a lot of child trafficking victims are not in control of their own lives, do not survive for very long, are continually in those trafficking networks and don't have the agency to actually know what's going on or to contact authorities and tell their story. They have no one to defend them, so their lives are at risk if they're even still alive to this day. So there's all these elements that go against us getting evidence to prosecute in that kind of an example. But there's also the aspect that the like you're saying, the lack of attention to child trafficking, which is, as you've had JJ Carroll and Ryan Mata on your show many times, and those guys are doing a great job of exposing that this is not a small industry. This is a massive, massive industry in our world today. And everything that I'm seeing about it and learning about it really indicates that it is feeding a need or a marketplace at the highest levels of power. And so it is only to be expected that if the highest rooms of power are using the services of the child trafficking networks for whatever reasons, then it has the highest levels of protection. And so time and again, we see misdirection, we see obfuscation, and we see just abject cover-ups to dismiss child trafficking cases and to push them to the side and not prosecute.
You're absolutely right about that. But what really scares me, I'll be honest with you, is that we know that most of these children end up dead. They are killed. And so to your point about them not being available, not being in the system, I mean, and now this is purely speculation here, but if this thing was as massive as it was, and it continued for as many years as it did, and in the indictment we hear about IVs being used because victims were so beat up and hurt that they were kept, hidden from the public for many, many days so they could be given IV drips. How many people is there murder here in the heart of this somewhere? We don't know, pure speculation, but that is where my mind goes when I hear that there's no children that they don't have children in this. Terrifying.
Well, it's important to note for anyone that hasn't read the Lil Rod the Rodney Jones versus Sean Combs lawsuit, that one is probably the one that sort of spurred this current arrest. That one directly alleges that Lil Rod was a witness to a murder that was either Diddy or his son shooting someone in a bathroom, and then police obviously did not investigate and swept it under the rug. So that's murder of like a prominent adult figure that has, a life and a paper trail and would require a cover up, right? That is, and then what you're saying about like abuse and IV fluids and stuff like that, like if you read the Cassie lawsuit that came against Diddy, I think a year ago now, that she talks about being kept in hotel rooms for a week or more at a time to heal from her wounds. And she's a public figure, a celebrity with fans, with like public image. So these are people that would be much harder to cover up abuse and murder. Whereas a trafficked child has no footprint, no support, no knowledge that they even exist. And so if Diddy, for example, is willing to beat Cassie to the point of needing to hide her in a hotel room for weeks at a time to heal, then you can only imagine what he's willing to do to someone that has no one looking for them and no one coming to save them. So it's only speculation at this point, but we know from other examples of the child trafficking networks and cases that children are killed all the time in these kinds of situations. And I can fear that is probably involved in this one too, allegedly. Yes. Again, we're speculating here on this, but you're absolutely right about that. When these children have no birth certificates, they're being ferreted across the border by coyotes, no parents at all. They're being used by these elites across the United States in the United States is
it's not just coyotes. Like, in fact, that's probably like a very small percentage of human trafficking that's done, especially with children. And there's underground tunneling systems as well in private aircrafts, varying sorts. But there's also NGOs. There's also philanthropy organizations, religious groups, where people are pretending to be religious, affiliated to religious organizations and groups, and they're bringing children in that they're not properly vetting. And there's witnesses that have come out, people that have been kidnapped from their families, even that have come out and shared their experiences of being survivors. And I've shared that on previous videos. You're not going to get it on YouTube, unfortunately, because my accounts keep on getting deleted. But on Rumble, Dawn189. I do have like multiple videos where there's like witness testimony of victims of varying degrees but it involve human trafficking in various countries, various ages, various sexes as well. Men are included in that as well.
Largest purveyor of sex trafficking of children in the world. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is massively profitable, and these elites will pay good money for it. And when they're used up, then they're tossed out, killed, gone. And there's hundreds of thousands of children who are missing in the United States. I would be stunned to not, I wouldn't be stunned at all. Is what I'm saying here. You mentioned Cassie. I'll get you out of here with this in a second here with the Cassie.
This is not even just in the U.S., Canada as well. Obviously, because we have a smaller population, it's lesser to a lesser degree, but it's all over the world. This is happening, and it's been happening for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Even Ellis Island and possibly in Partridge Island were also the like the points of entry for children that were used as slaves, I would say, of varying degrees, including sex slaves.
Lawsuit. So a lot of that, I mean, this was settled quickly, right? Very fast. So it remains uncertain how these sort of prior settlements that Diddy has gone through will affect this federal case. She's not talking about it. They've, again, they were quickly settled. So instead of seeing all of this evidence presented to the public through discovery and other things, it's all sealed. We'll never see it. How much of that do you think will affect this federal case?
Fortunately, there is so much criminality and evidence alleged that, like, the Cassidy lawsuit was settled out of court, and so there are certainly ND.
A bit off topic. Topic. I don't even know what that word is. It's not a word. Bit off topic, but I like this. It's from Valiant Thor. There's an agency who knows exactly what happens and who did it. Nobody on this planet is missing. Everyone is accounted for. I do believe that this is some kind of a simulation or video game, whatever you want to call it, higher level and more intelligently created or is designed than we could ever do. And so I do think that our characters or our avatars are being played by higher level consciousness beings, and so they're tracking what's going on in the simulation. So there's that. But there's also groups here, you're right, that have like incredible surveillance capabilities, not only within our airspace, but also our our social media platforms, whatever you want to call it, means of communication. And so I don't think that like people like, for example, like the Black Rocks, the Lockheed Martin types, like those groups likely have the capacity to track all this stuff, right? Yeah. Way off tangent, sorry.
EAs and certainly like aspects of that are now not prosecutable because of the settlement. But there's so much more that I can only imagine that they have a lifetime's worth of cases left to bring against him. And the Lil Rod lawsuit was not settled in any form, as far as I'm aware. And so that combined with the raid on Diddy's properties that happened earlier this year, I'm sure they have lots that they can prosecute him on. They should have all of the tapes and all of the video files if they raided his house and apparently carried out his computers. And so I think that those things are playing into the case in some degree. But if they don't have enough to prosecute Diddy and put him away for life and get him to squeal, then they are clearly not doing their jobs and covering things up, because there is no shortage of crimes to charge Diddy with.
Right. It seems like they had a grab bag of things they could have put on this indictment, and there's things that they perhaps even held back from putting on this indictment.
They did hold back on putting things in the indictment. Sorry, I'm just wanted to show some things on the NRO. So it's in the States. So it's the National Reconnaissance Office is a member of the United States intelligence community and an agency of the United States Department of Defense, which designs, builds, launches, and operates the reconnaissance satellites of the U.S. federal government. Okay, so yeah, that would make sense to me. And they are funded or staffed by DOD, which is Department of Defense, for those that don't know it, and Central Intelligence Agency personnel. The NRO's federal workforce is a hybrid organization consisting of some 3,000 personnel, including NRO cadre, Air Force, Army, CIA, NGA, NSA, Navy, and U.S. Space Force personnel. So yeah, it looks like they have the capacity. If they can track and monitor terrorists and drug traffickers and criminal organizations, then why not, human traffickers? Yeah, so they're probably involved, but I don't know. Probably involved in like the cover up too. I don't know. I'm jaded. Sorry, sounded very negative. It's just there's so much capability to prevent this, and yeah,
because they just had so much. Unbelievable. You can follow Ian's great work, Cancel Coco on X, as well as all of the other platforms, doing amazing work as always. And we really
okay. So that's over. That was a great podcast. I don't know what you would call it. Just want to share some photos of some of the people that are involved in the allegations against Diddy. So it's not just him, obviously. I don't know if it's this one. It's not coming up. Here we go. Again, not a reputable source. It's TMZ, but it's just to show the photos. And these people are legitimately named in these, or at least were named in prior documents. But just like Hunter Biden, right? Like there's so many crimes that were shown, proven evidence on that laptop. And so he had these like such minor charges against him. They were all these like gun charges, right? Like this is insane to me. Anyway. There's Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know who that is, but he does look familiar. He might be like another actor. I don't know. And that's obviously P. Diddy or Sean Combs or Puff Daddy, whatever people want to call him. Yeah. Some naked people in a pool. I think these are called like the freak fests. Yeah. Yeah. And so this, I'll just copy and paste it into this one to see if that works. I'm just putting in another article. Little Rod, just because he was talking about him. Producer suing Diddy for $30 million, speaks out in interview. He's a monster. Rodney Little Rod Jones says he's now broke and in hiding as the bombshell lawsuit that could take down Sean Combs and his empire moves through the courts and has just been hit with a motion to dismiss. As a motion to dismiss Rodney Little Rod Jones' bombshell lawsuit against rap and fashion mogul Sean Diddy Combs has resurfaced the case in the courts and media. The upstart producer accusing the powerful industry player of grooming and exposing him to several crimes spoke out in an interview as he remains in hiding. He revealed he's having suicidal thoughts, is broke and afraid to appear in public as he believes he will be killed, but says that he will continue standing up for justice. Anyway, it goes on. Again, it's all redundant, I know. And there's a lot of people that have been speaking on Diddy. And so, anyway. Now onto the corporate / government / deep state / whatever you want to call it stuff. CIA whistleblower John Stockwell, 1989.
Overthrow functioning. We've set out to overthrow functioning constitutional democracies in over 20 countries. We manipulated elections in dozens of countries. We created standing armies and directed them to fight. We went after to organize ethnic minorities to encourage them to revolt. The first thing we did in Nicaragua was to go to the Mosquito Indians, who had never gotten along with the other people in Nicaragua very well, and give them more money than they had seen in the entirety of history, and arms and training and rationales and sanctuaries in Honduras, and sent them into Nicaragua to attack, kill, fight, rape, burn, pillage. And this is an insidious thing. Every society is torn with racial conflicts and conflicts with minorities. Think how violent our nation is. Think what if there were a superpower so big that we didn't dare even flat back or strike back at them, that were coming to our minorities with huge sums of money and arms and training people from our minority groups and sending them into the country to do open acts of violence. How we would rise up and the bloodbath that would ensue. And this has been a technique the CIA has used in Nicaragua, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Laos, in the Congo, in Iran, Iraq with the Kurds, in different parts of the world. We created, trained, and funded death squads like the Treasury Police in El Salvador that are responsible for killing as many as 70,000 people, according to the count of the Catholic Church. And we've assassinated world leaders, including the United States president in 1963. And I'll get to that in more detail in just a moment. Getting back to the subject of democracy, since that's something that Bush and everyone is talking about right now, I remind you of Chile. In 1973, the CIA organized the overthrow of Salvador Allende, the democratically elected president of Chile. And he was killed in the process, and we killed General Schneider, who was the pro-U.S. defender of the Constitution there, in order to put the CIA's representative Pinochet in power. And Henry Kissinger's, when he was grilled by the Congress over this program, his rationale was, yes, the issues are much too important for the Chilean voters to be left to decide for themselves. Now, there was a long CI destabilization and propaganda campaign against China. We were parachuting teams from Quemoy, Matsu, Tibet, Burma, Thailand to destabilize China with the propaganda campaign, the propaganda aimed at the United States as well as China and other parts of the world, until eventually we talked ourselves into the Korean War, in which 1 million people were, where we fought China in Korea and 1 million people were killed. There was a long CI destabilization and propaganda campaign against Vietnam until we talked ourselves into going into Vietnam to fight, and 2 million people were killed. Again, read for yourselves. Read Bill Blum's book, The CIA, A Forgotten History. Read Portrait of a Cold Warrior by Joseph Burkholder Smith, who was a CIA case officer in Southeast Asia. Read Fire in the Lake by Frances Fitzgerald, the daughter of Desmond Fitzgerald, the famous CIA chief of operations of Southeast Asia. Read Deadly Deceits by Ralph McGehee, another case officer who served in Southeast Asia. Read Decent Interval by Frank Snapp, who covered the period of time in Vietnam, 73, 75. He and I were colleagues there at that time. Or if you will, read my own book, In Search of Enemies by Norton, which remains the only insider's detailed account of the inner functionings of a covert action. Or read Washington's War on Nicaragua by Holly Sklar, not written by an insider, but a remarkable detail on the Nicaraguan operation, great detail of how that operation has been run. Trying to come to grips with these CIA activities and these broad numbers, trying to figure out how many people have been killed. You can count it up different ways. You can never be sure how many people are killed in the jungles of Laos or the hills of Nicaragua, but adding them up as best we can, we come up with a figure of 6 million people killed, minimum figure. It has to be more than that. 1 million in the Korean War, 2 million in the Vietnam War, 800,000 in Indonesia, a couple of million in Cambodia, 20,000 in Angola, the operation I was part of, 22,000 in Nicaragua, again, the figure the New York Times cites. You're dealing with large numbers of people who died who would not have died if our tax dollars had not been spent by the CIA to exacerbate situations and destabilize and set people to fighting. So you began to analyze these figures to figure out who are these 6 million people we've killed. And again, that's a minimum figure. The conservatives tell us it's a dangerous world. Our enemies have to die so we can be safe and secure. Some of them say, I'm sorry about that, but that's the way the world is. We have to accept this reality. So you begin to study these things and rip through them and analyze them and break them apart, and you find some shocking common denominators come out to you. Namely, for example, since 1954, we do not parachute teams into the Soviet Union to destabilize the country in a brutal way. Coincidentally, 1954 was the first year the Soviets developed their actual capability of actually dropping atomic weapons on the United States. For other reasons, we don't do these things in England, France, Sweden, Norway, Belgium, Switzerland, etc. These things are all done in countries of the third world where the governments don't have the power to force the United States to stop destabilizing the country and brutalizing their people. These 6 million people killed are people of the Mitumba Mountains of the Congo and the jungles of Southeast Asia and the hills of northern Nicaragua. Conspicuously, they're people who don't have ICBMs or armies or navies. They don't have any capability of doing physical hurt to the United States. The 22,000 killed in Nicaragua, for example, they're conspicuously not Russians. They're not Cuban soldiers or advisors. They're not even percentage-wise mostly Sandinistas. They're mostly rag-poor peasants, including a high percentage of women and children. Communists, I'm sorry, they're mostly Roman Catholics. Enemies of the United States, I can't give you that one either, because we have all these witnesses who've gone down to live in their villages with them, and they invariably come back to testify that the Nicaraguans are the warmest people on the face of the earth, and they love people from the United States, and they simply cannot understand why we would want, our leaders would want to rationalize spending $1 billion on a contraforce to go into their villages, to kill them and mutilate them while their families are forced to watch.
So
we've set out to
got one more for you. maybe 2.
And catastrophic happens.
Oh, way too far. Sorry.
Usually when Hey everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about all things inner Earth. Now, I know there are a bunch of videos out there on this topic, but I do feel like none of them really cover the whole subject. Most of them either look at it from a hollow Earth angle or they only scratch the surface of what's really going on. Here's the thing about hollow Earth though. It's always talked about like the Earth is definitely a globe with a hollow center. But a lot of people find that hard to swallow, so they end up dismissing the whole idea as just some crazy fantasy. But even if the Earth isn't shaped how we think it is, there could still be huge underground spaces where people or other beings are living. Usually when talking about Hollow Earth, it's always about this hidden civilization called Agartha living in the center. But if we shift our focus to Inner Earth instead, we're not stuck on any one model of what we're living on. It's more about the idea that there could be hidden civilizations beneath our feet, no matter what shape the Earth is. Think about it. We've only drilled about 7 miles down into the Earth.
8 miles.
Now in this video, I'm not going to prescribe to any specific model. I just wanted to preface with that no one really knows how far you can go down, which means there's a lot of mystery when it comes to what's beneath our feet. Is there a secret government controlling the surface from below? Are there different races of human beings like tree people? Perhaps there's something to all these myths and accounts of advanced civilizations beneath the surface. With that, let's keep an open mind and dive right in. The idea that there's a deep state is often labeled as a conspiracy theory, but there are many things to consider when it comes to the idea of underground government. With myths and legends, it starts to make the idea of an underground civilization seem just like a made-up story. But today, right now in real life, there not only exists the technology to create vast underground bunkers and tunnels, but there are in fact several deep underground military bases, also known as domes, around the world. And supposedly, many of these underground bases are connected by high-speed underground maglev trains that allow long-distance travel in very short periods of time. Let's dive into some of these known domes. First, there's the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado. And this isn't really a secret or anything. It's an acknowledged military installation built into the granite heart of Cheyenne Mountain. Originally designed to withstand a nuclear blast, this place is like a small underground city. It's got its own power plant, water supply, and can house over 1,000 people. It's so massive that it has 15 three-story buildings, all mounted on giant springs to absorb the shock of a potential nuclear blast. But what's interesting is that some insiders claim that what we know about Cheyenne Mountain is just the tip of the iceberg. The facility is said to go much deeper and is much more extensive than officially admitted. Then we've got the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania, also known as Site R or the Underground Pentagon. This facility is carved into the granite of Raven Rock and is believed to be the emergency command center for the US military in case Washington, D.C. gets wiped out. It's said to have up to 900,000 square feet of interior space. But get this, there are rumors that Raven Rock has entire underground cities, complete with streets, buildings, and even a subterranean lake. Of course, the government doesn't confirm or deny these claims. Next is the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center in Virginia. This place is run by FEMA and is supposed to be where the US government would operate from in case of a national disaster. It's said to have underground bunkers that can house several thousand people, its own police and fire departments, and even a radio and TV studio to communicate with survivors after a catastrophe. But some whistleblowers have suggested that Mount Weather is actually the seat of a shadow government, ready to take control at a moment's notice. Okay, but here's where it gets wild. There are alleged connections between these bases. Supposedly, there's a network of high-speed maglev trains running through deep underground tunnels, connecting these domes and others across the country. Some people claim that you could travel from the East Coast to the West Coast in just a couple of hours using this secret subway system. And apparently, it's not just in the US. There are reports of similar facilities all over the world, like the Pine Gap facility in Australia. Officially, it's a joint defense space research facility, but there are theories that it goes miles deep into the Earth and houses advanced alien technology. Then I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the Dulce base in New Mexico. Now, this one's not officially acknowledged, but there are the stories about a massive underground facility jointly run by humans and extraterrestrials. People talk about multiple underground levels dedicated to genetic experiments, alien technology, and even cloning if aliens are true, or that they come from space.
I don't believe that.
That's just a theme that gets brought up a lot with these secret bases.
I don't buy into that. Into it, aliens and things like that, like from like outer space. I believe that this is a contained environment. I don't believe that anything's come in or out within this cosmos, this earth plane, whatever you want to call it. And then anything that could be seen or classified as an alien could be some kind of either AI, some kind of hologram that's being projected. They could be very realistic looking. Just look at New York and Dubai, like the advanced capabilities they have with holograms and government, and this has been recorded throughout history as well. There's that. There's also people that could be wearing costumes and prosthetics. It could be people that, there's been like scientific experiments done, like eugenics, in vitro and or, through their developing process to make them appear to be like a little bit different than the typical human as we perceive them. But I don't think that they're coming from outer space as we're being led to believe. And no, I don't. Nope.
But it could be a cover for the government possessing advanced tech far beyond the public's knowledge, or perhaps they come from breakaway civilizations. The thing is, with the boring technology that we have today, creating these vast underground networks isn't just possible, it's practical. Companies like Elon Musk's The Boring Company have shown how quickly and efficiently we can dig tunnels. And that's just the tech that they're showing us. Imagine what kind of advanced boring machines might exist in classified military projects. Now, some of you may think that this underground boring tech is some new, cutting-edge stuff, but the crazy thing is, people have been dreaming up and even trying to build these underground machines for over a century. In 1904, there was this guy named Pyotr Raskazov, who was from Moscow, who designed what might have been the first underground self-propelled combat unit. And this is in 1904. Unfortunately, his designs got lost during World War I, only to pop up later in Germany. But it shows that people were thinking about this stuff even back then. Interestingly, in the 1930s, in the Soviet Union, a guy named Treblev came up with what he called the underground boat. It was basically a capsule-shaped machine with a drill on the nose, a screw, and two pairs of jacks at the back that worked like a mole's paws. This thing could supposedly be controlled from inside or outside through a cable. And it actually worked, moving at about 10 meters per hour underground. But it gets even crazier. At the same time, in Nazi Germany, they were cooking up their own underground vehicles. The names kind of sound like they're right out of a sci-fi novel, Subterrane and Midgardschlange. The Midgardschlange was supposed to be this massive, modular, super amphibian that could move on land, underground, and even underwater. We're talking about a machine 400 to 525 meters long, with a displacement of 60,000 tons. And they allegedly tested this in 1939. Okay, so I know many of you are thinking this sounds like some far-fetched comic book stuff. And yeah, probably some of it is exaggerated. But the thing is, after World War II, Soviet counterintelligence found some weird, unexplained tunnels near Königsberg, along with what they thought were the remains of the Midgard Shanga. So maybe there was something to these wild ideas after all. But wait, in the 1950s, there were reports of a mechanical mole being developed. And then in 1964, the Soviets unveiled something called the Battle Mole. It wasn't just a drill, we're talking about a nuclear-powered submarine. The project was so classified, it was even more secret than the Soviet nuclear program. The Battle Mole was no joke. It had a titanium body, was about 3 to 4 meters in diameter, and 25 to 35 meters long. They say it could move through solid rock at speeds between 7 and 15 kilometers per hour. That's faster than most people can run, and this thing was going through solid rock. And it gets crazy because the Soviets had some pretty terrifying plans for this machine. One of the most alarming missions they thought up was to send it off to the California coast, burrow into geologically unstable areas, and plant nuclear charges. The idea was that they could set these off to cause earthquakes, tsunamis, and other massively destructive events. It's basically a secret underground doomsday weapon. They even tested this thing in the Ural Mountains, and apparently, it went through rock like a knife through butter. In 1964, during a test run, the Battle Mole allegedly exploded while it was underground, killing everyone on board and bringing the whole project to a screeching halt. Now, I'm not saying all this definitely happened, but the thing is, we know governments were seriously looking into this tech. And if they were thinking about this stuff back in the early 1900s, imagine what they might have now that we don't know about. So yeah, we've been talking about these modern underground bases and secret tunnels, but the thing is, this underground tech might go back way further than we think. I'm talking 18th and 19th century stuff that'll make you wonder what's really been going on beneath our feet all this time. This is pretty mind-blowing. In 1799, this guy named George Medhurst came up with an idea to move goods through cast iron pipes using air pressure. By 1844, he built a railway station in London using pneumatics. Just think about that for a second. In 1844, when most people were still getting around by horse and carriage, these people were literally zooming through underground tubes. By the mid-1850s, they had pneumatic railways popping up in Dublin, London, and Paris. In London, they had this thing called the pneumatic dispatch system. It was meant for parcels, but it was big enough to carry people. In fact, in 1865, the Duke of Buckingham took a ride through it. I mean, really? A duke crawling into what's basically a giant mail tube for a joyride? It's almost like they found this tech and were like, dude, check it out, we can actually fit in here. In 1867 in New York, they had the Beach Pneumatic Transit. It wasn't just little mail tubes, we're talking about a legit underground transit system. And this was 37 years before the New York City subway as we know it today. But I think the interesting thing about this is when you look at the photos of these old pneumatic systems, they look insanely advanced for their time. And then you look at our modern subway that came after, and it just looks like we took a massive step backwards. It's almost as if we forgot how to do something amazing and had to start all over. And the official story is that all these tunnels were dug out by hand, with basic tools like shovels and wheelbarrows. But let's think about that for a second. In 2018, Seattle spent 6 years and $80 million on a tunnel boring machine to dig a single tunnel downtown. And they're telling us that in the 1860s, they carved out entire networks of tunnels under major cities with, what, pickaxes and elbow grease? Something's not adding up. And when you look at the photos of these old tunnels, they don't look like they were freshly dug. You could say ancient, like they were being uncovered rather than built. It's almost as if these 19th century engineers found something old and tried to get it working again. And interestingly, there are accounts of tunnel boring machines being used as far back as 1846. A guy named Frederick Beaumont supposedly came up with one during the Second Industrial Revolution. But when you look at what they claim these machines could do compared to our modern tunnel borers, it's kind of hard to believe. It really makes you think, What if these weren't new inventions at all? What if they were rediscoveries of much older tech? And this gets into some other bizarre phenomenon that's reported all around the world. It's called the hum. So what is it exactly? It's this low frequency sound that some people hear, but others can't. It's like a low rumble or a droning sound. Supposedly, only about 2% of people in affected areas can hear it, and each person hears it at a slightly different frequency, usually between 32 and 80 hertz. And that's pretty low. I mean, most of us can't even hear sounds that low. And some people might just say, oh, it's tinnitus or something. But it gets weird because people report that it's worse indoors and outdoors. Some people can even move away from it like it has a specific range. One person in Taos said that they could hear it within a 30-mile radius. It's almost as if there's some kind of source, but nobody can pinpoint exactly what or where it is. So what's causing it? Well, some researchers think that it might be related to industrial equipment or high-pressure gas pipelines. But there are people that believe the hum might be connected to secret underground activities. I mean, think about it. With all these underground bases and tunnels,
There's that, but there's also even now like close to developed areas, like suburb city areas, where there's even more space getting taken over, even protected lands, crown lands, heritage sites, etc. And there's a lot of explosions that are happening by these destruction companies, not construction companies, the destruction ones. And these blasts are also not only breaking or cracking foundations and things like that, but it's also possibly eliciting like even like flooding and stuff like that, and in other events. And this is not just in Canada. I'm talking about even internationally, right? Where it was even possibly destruction on like even with dams and stuff like that. When anyway, it is what it is. People need to look more into that.
what if some of that machinery, some type of boring tech, or who knows what else they've got down there, is causing this sound? Interestingly, the hum seems to avoid publicity. There are reports of it subsiding when there's increased local press coverage. Almost like
And I am tracking what's going on in Australia right now regarding snow over the last couple of days, where there's even footage of vehicles that are basically abandoned. Some people look like they're still possibly in their vehicles, like the lights are on, they're running. Some of the vehicles are turned off, so and they can't drive, right? Like there's so much snow on the roads that it's impeding mobility. And so, yeah, like I've said this for the last couple of years, they're going to keep on, they as in like people that are monopolizing on the military pharmaceutical industrial complex, which also involves this climate scam that we're paying into internationally, right? Not by people that have any national pride or care about fucking actual climate change. It's people that are making a lot of money off of this. These corporatists, currentists, greedy people is what I'm talking about. And they're going to keep on escalating these things that look like natural disasters to try to keep on reinforcing these lies, right? The more you say something, even if it's not true, like the more people are going to be convinced that it's true or real, and it's not, right? So there are people that can do things like weather modification, geoengineering, and it's caused even in Dubai, those rainfalls that caused the flooding. This is something that is now open source information if you just research it, and there's patents and there's people that have been admitting this, and government data that I've even shared over the years that shows that this is in fact happening. Weather modification, geoengineering, and these are things that are causing harm and damage in areas where there's more people. These fires as well. I've not only shown that there's possibility of but via air hitting multiple different destinations or targets, and fires starting simultaneously, like far away from each other. Doesn't make any sense. And so not by climate change. This is arson by whoever this is, but there's also people that are getting told and paid to start fires as well. So I've also shared footage of a witness account. Again, it's not proof enough, but a witness account of a guy that was sharing information. He was showing like different wildfires that were happening in like multiple different areas, like miles and miles apart. And he had said that the reason why he was sharing that is because he was talking to a couple of guys, and they were told, and they didn't know by who, but they were told and paid to start these fires. So like there's these men that these young men that went out to these areas allegedly and started these fires. So this guy was saying it, and then he was sharing these fires. They were all started at the same time, different locations. And so anyway, there's just more stuff that we need to look into, and don't automatically assume that what we're calling climate change or natural disasters, that they're not, in fact, they're possibly man-made is what I'm saying.
It's like whatever's causing it can be turned off or redirected when too many people start asking questions. Well, let's keep going deeper. There's something called continuity of government programs, or COG for short. Now, on the surface, it sounds pretty legit, but it's about making sure the government can keep running if something catastrophic happens. This COG program has underground components. We're talking about massive, fully equipped bunkers that could house key government officials for months, maybe even years. And these are real places, just like Raven Rock, like we were talking about. Many believe these aren't just for emergencies, that there's a shadow government already operating out of these facilities. A whole parallel power structure making decisions that affect us all, hidden away deep underground, a literal
I don't know
deep
about that.
state. And there's definitely more to this, from global surveillance operations to bioweapon development, human trafficking, and even cloning facilities, all occurring underneath the surface and occulted.
We're going on too many tangents on this. I did want to show, though, like the discussions from Mine Unveiled regarding corporations and regarding like the underground tunneling systems, because I did mention them prior to from a previous video that I was sharing. And so I think that's enough for today. So on that note, I will leave it at that, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.